The penalties are significant fines and possible jail terms, both for breach of trust and obstruction of justice.
Justin Trudeau and his government could see possible fines and jail time finally being held to account for the atrocities that they have committed on this country and on their own cabinet members. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, like, share, comment your thoughts down below. Give me a follow on other social media platforms as well. Lots of stuff to get into today. A couple of breaking news announcements are out regarding Mark Carney, the Liberals' new project, the media's complete failure to really address any of these things. Michael Barrett was a man on fire yesterday when he was speaking about a lot of these issues and the transparency. Remember when the Trudeau government said they were going to be so transparent? Ooh, actions really do speak louder than words. Justin Trudeau got a little emotional and teary-eyed when he was giving a final speech. We'll talk about that and more today on Over Opinionated.
Today, I'm announcing the launch of ALTO, the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history.
And if you made the mistake of hoping that the largest infrastructure project in Canadian history had something to do with exporting our oil or improving our economy, you would in fact be wrong. Yep, with 18 days left in office, Justin Trudeau had one last attempt at buying some votes by launching a high-speed rail that is going to bring Quebec and Ontario together. Now, of course, the media will spin this in a way and not criticize it at all by saying, how could anybody be opposed to this? It's so unifying to get Ontario and also Quebec that much easier to travel in between. And yeah, of course, high-speed rail is a great thing. Our country can definitely benefit from that and needs more of it. But it just seems like a very weird priority given the Trump tariff threats. And also, this is just, to me, it's one last-ditch effort to secure in those votes from Quebec, which is where the Liberals typically dominate. And I'm not trying to be negative about this story. Obviously, high-speed rail is great. It's something they've been promising us for like 2 decades already, and it still hasn't happened. And travel within Canada is incredibly expensive. Seriously, last week I wanted to go to Ottawa, and to go to Ottawa for a weekend was the same price as going to Europe for a week. So obviously I didn't book that. But they say it's going to cost about $3.9 billion, 6 years to complete. However, we have Trump tariffs coming up, so I don't quite know why this in particular would be a priority outside of vote buying for Quebec. But with Trump tariffs, and aluminum and steel and all of these things, which Mark Carney says we don't actually use or need.
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming. There's some element of that, but by and large, a steel company, how much steel are you using these days, Todd? I mean, not as much we used. So
that price is going to jump up significantly in the next 2 weeks alone. So will it take 6 years? Will it cost that amount of money? No, probably not. I just don't like to get too hyped up over things when past history shows a pretty good indicator of what is to come in the future. Let's just get the Justin Trudeau clips out of the way because I know that you don't like listening to him, but it is important to know what's going on in your country, even if you don't like the voice of the person who is presenting that information. So Justin Trudeau got pretty emotional. He had what he said is his last speech while he was going over and signing everything for the Haida land title ceremony. Just in case you're unfamiliar, you're not from the region, the Haida are an indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast of North America. They are federally recognized as tribes in Alaska, and Justin Trudeau has officially signed a land title agreement with their community.
I was one of my first trips as Liberal leader, and I can't think of any place more appropriate for one of my very last. Sorry. You guys,
Now, a lot of people are taking this opportunity to roast him on social media over getting very emotional. I'm not taking that stance personally. I'm sure that it is very emotional. I'm sure his life is very emotional right now after everything that he's done and the terrible, disgraceful legacy that he has left behind. And boy, oh boy, that just seems to be getting much, much worse.
I am here today to announce that Democracy Watch is taking the next step in its years-long process to hold the Trudeau government and Prime Minister Trudeau and the Trudeau cabinet accountable for pressuring the Attorney General back in the fall of 2018 to intervene and stop the prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. Given the evidence and given as well that the RCMP did not apply the correct legal standard in terms of reviewing the evidence and determining whether there had been an obstruction of justice, and also given that the RCMP did not consider in its investigation whether the Prime Minister or anyone else had committed a breach of trust, Democracy Watch is today filing an application in Ontario Court of Justice for court approval to pursue a private prosecution of these allegations of obstruction of justice and breach of trust.
Just as a little refresher, the SNC-Lavalin scandal was a pretty big one that happened very early on in Justin Trudeau's prime ministership. They are a major engineering and construction firm based in Quebec, and they faced criminal charges in 2015 for corruption and fraud related to alleged bribes that were offered to officials in order to secure contracts. Normally, had this been convicted the way that it should have been, this would have led to a decade-long ban from federal contracts, which obviously would have been a disaster for the company, which largely operates on federal contracts. So in 2018, the Canadian government had introduced a number of amendments to the criminal code, which allowed for deferred prosecution agreements known as DPAs. And these agreements would have enabled SNC-Lavalin to avoid any criminal trials as long as they met certain things, such as like paying fines, implementing corrective measures. And SNC-Lavalin also really wanted one of these agreements. However, the Director of Public Prosecutions declined their request. Then, in February of 2019, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had allegedly pressured then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene and secure a DPA for SNC-Lavalin. So she resisted that and ended up resigning within the cabinet, which a lot of people thought was a demotion. And then she ended up resigning from cabinet altogether, including another minister as well, Jane Philpott. And it was all due to the concerns that they had, what they knew about how the government had handled that situation. This was when, in August 2019, the Ethics Commissioner released a report and concluded that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did violate a Conflict of Interest Act and also improperly pressured Jody Wilson-Raybould in the matter. It said that his actions were very contrary to the principles of prosecutorial independence and the rule of law. Trudeau accepted responsibility, but maintained that his intentions were solely to protect Canadian jobs, not to protect this particular firm of which they were involved in. However, if you think about some of the contracts that were secured, while Mark Carney, as an example, who was chair of Brookfield Asset Management, and somehow Brookfield Asset Management got contracts through the federal government, even though that would have been a massive conflict of interest because he was advising the Trudeau Liberals as far back as 2020 and then officially on paper as far back as 2024 in the eyes of the courts. So if there's any evidence whatsoever that 2020 was actually when it was first announced that he was on board giving them assistance, that would still all be ruled the exact same. It doesn't matter that it happened to be on paper some 4 years later. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an ethics whiz over here, but I do think it's important to note that Brookfield Global Integrated Solutions, BGIS, actually had a very big contract with the federal government in the 2021 to 2022 fiscal year. Again, Mark Carney started advising Justin Trudeau, as reported by the press, by whistleblowers, by sources, in 2020, that the government of Canada spent over $1 billion on contracts with BGIS, which actually made it one of the largest vendors for federal contracts during that period. Again, as far as we know, as far as I'm aware of, Mark Carney was chair of Brookfield Asset Management during that period of time and was also advising the Trudeau government financially. In terms of lobbying activities, they have dozens of little layers and whatever into their company that all do government lobbying. And while we don't actually have specific figures for lobbying in Canada for 2020, there is evidence of Brookfield's active engagement with the Canadian federal government. Not just the fact that Mark Carney was advising Justin Trudeau during this period of time, but in 2024, reports emerged that Brookfield Asset Management was lobbying the federal government for $10 billion in taxpayer funds as part of a $50 billion Canada-only asset fund. That sounds like money laundering to me. Though Mark Carney says, oh no, I wasn't involved at the time. Well, are you sure about that? Because you were actually the vice chairman of Brookfield at the time. So we should probably look into that one.
Carbon tax Carney is looking to lead the Liberal Party of Canada. This is a party that's been led by Justin Trudeau and a group of ministers who are known serial ethical lawbreakers. These Liberal cabinet ministers, who Mark Carney is going to put in his cabinet, have been found to have broken the very law that Mark Carney says he's going to follow. Canadians can't believe what Mark Carney has said. They can't trust him. He's just like Justin. Only because Justin Trudeau shielded Mark Carney from the usual accountability practice. To be clear, the rules weren't designed for a situation like this and would need to be updated to reflect the reality that we find ourselves in. I don't believe that the architects of these rules could have imagined the lengths that Liberals would go to break the law as it had been and avoid the law as it had been created.
That right there is so significant too. The people who initially created these laws could have never imagined that an elected prime minister who swore an oath to this country could be so corrupt that they would go to the lengths that they have in order to avoid accountability and protect people who, by all accounts, evidence is suggesting have committed very wrong acts using our tax dollars. But I always say the only reason why corruption exists is because you allow it to exist by having too many channels, by having too many delays, by letting people be lazy and complacent and allowing them to get away with it. That's why corruption exists. When you have a tight system with less employees, there's less opportunity for things to slip in between the cracks. And the Liberal government for the last decade now has gone above and beyond doing everything they possibly can to ensure that there are so many people working, there are so many things to do, there are far more tasks to cover than you have people to do, and therefore you don't have anybody who's actually able to do anything. Because the line of command or the chain of command is so massively long that nothing actually gets done. Nobody's accountable. Everybody can just blame the other guy. That's the biggest problem with really massive bureaucracy, with a very large government. And I'm not going to lie, when I hear things like this, it just makes me think, oh, they did that on purpose, because that's how you were able to get away with it then.
Mark Carney needs to make that public disclosure, and he can't wait until after the Liberal leadership. He can't wait until after the next election. He needs to do it now. He's skated for far too long by avoiding the spirit of the law as it had been written.
So what I understand from what you're saying, basically, is that Mark Carney is not breaking any rules right now. Is that what you're saying?
It's absolutely unacceptable that we have someone who was allowed by Justin Trudeau, a serial ethical lawbreaker, a prime minister,
What rule is he breaking? Can you explain to us what rule he's breaking right now?
A prime minister twice found guilty of breaking Canada's ethics laws.
Mark Carney, what rule has he broken?
A prime minister who's twice found guilty of breaking Canada's ethics laws created a path for Mark Carney to sit in the prime minister's office and to advise him, all the while he was making decisions that enriched himself and enriched his company. Transparency is required for Canadians. The rules as they exist today are not they don't go far enough to ensure that we have transparency. We've seen after 9 years of Justin Trudeau that the rules and the penalties as they exist aren't sufficient to deal with a Liberal government who is content to break the rules as they're written and to avoid the law wherever possible.
This does definitely seem to be a pattern. Also on that note, government spending on outside contracts in 2024 had risen to $17.8 billion. That's crazy. And that also comes after the Trudeau government was called out for this because it's insane to spend that much money on consultants. And some of the consultants that they hired were consultants to teach them how to spend their money better, which is just like, what?
The RCMP did a weak, incomplete investigation. They only interviewed 4 of 15 key witnesses, and they trusted the public statements of everyone involved in pressuring the Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould. The penalties are significant fines and possible jail terms, both for breach of trust and obstruction of justice. So obviously we have to get over the hurdles first of having a court move to a pre-enquête hearing, and then out of that hearing have the court actually issue the warrant and for the charge and the prosecution proceeding. It's because of these kind of situations where the world and international entities look at our system and say, this system lets people get away with wrongdoing through delay, secrecy, lack of accountability. Now we're into, with this application, the judicial system, the Ontario judicial system, where the justices of the peace are appointed by the provincial governments, have some independence and are not serving at the pleasure of the Prime Minister.
Democracy Watch had released new RCMP records that suggested that the top aides in Trudeau's office linked the pressure on Wilson-Raybould to go and get them one of these DPAs to the Liberal Party's electoral strategy. One aide reportedly stated that intervention was necessary to, quote, help the Liberals get re-elected. The lengths they have gone in order to stay in power. Obviously, this has not yet been prosecuted, but they are wanting to hold members of Trudeau's government and Justin Trudeau himself for their political interference and obstruction of justice, something that the mainstream media isn't talking about. I actually tried searching for this on the news pages today, couldn't find it anywhere, even though it came out yesterday. I really wanted to touch on some of the insanity coming out of Trudeau camp about Donald Trump and Trump tariffs. But I'm going to save that for tomorrow's video, I believe, because this video is already starting to get long. So maybe I'll just make a standalone about that. I don't know. Tell me what you think about that idea. It's funny. It's hypocritical. We're doing some comparisons. I have a lot of thoughts on everything that has been going on. Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below, of course. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. You can also like the video. That helps YouTube show it to more people, apparently. And I will talk to you tomorrow.